Energy for Hydrocarbons, Mexico's Ministry of Energy, Max Torres, Exploration VP at PetroTal, and Jose Chalhoub, Venezuela Analyst at Jose Parejo and Associates, Caracas. Welcome all, and it's great to be discussing how the title is Trump Tariffs could reshape US-LATAM energy trade in 2025, but I'm sure we'll get into much more of both the internal and external issues shaping some of the key energy producers such as Venezuela and Mexico. And maybe Jose, I could start with you. Given that the situation in Venezuela, it's probably one of the first things in Donald Trump's sights. But Maduro issues have been going on for some time now. Trump will have a fresh approach to Biden. How do you see that, and what do you make of the threat of further sanctions, and how sanctions will be used with Venezuela?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Well, yes, actually, I believe that this new term of Donald Trump will be different in terms of his approach towards Venezuela, because his former policy failed. His all options are on the table regarding Venezuela during his first term in the White House. Failed. Didn't produce much in terms of forced regime change. I do think that he's going to come with a new approach. He will try to negotiate critical issues for him, considering his agenda on Venezuela. Even though that, in my view, Venezuela is not a top priority for him or for his foreign policy, considering other more urgent topics like China, for example. So he will try to negotiate with the most likely a new Maduro term in government, issues like migration, for example, considering the huge inflows of illegal Venezuelans that are migrating to the United States. That's become a huge headache for the U.S. government and U.S. authorities. He will try to negotiate a deal, maybe trying to allow more oil investments in Venezuela with the new Maduro government in exchange for reducing or taming the huge inflows of illegal Venezuelans, some of them belonging to illegal criminal bands like the Tren de Aragua, for example, that have been committing criminal activities in different cities in the United States. So that's, for me, that'll be the most that'll be a new approach by a Trump administration, even though considering that he's nominated Marco Rubio, for example, as a potential Secretary of State, considering his hard approach against Venezuelan Maduro government. So, but that is my view.
And just to follow up quickly, before I talk to you, Max, and you, Aldo, just on this issue as well is one thing specifically on the oil focus for 25. If Trump is going maximum pressure on Iran, for example, and his mantra has been getting oil prices down, is there a scenario where Trump wants to see extra Venezuelan barrels coming back onto the market? Wouldn't that be a benefit for the US in terms of, especially with its terms of negotiating capacity with Canada and Mexico as neighbors, given that issue, which we'll get into later. But isn't it in Trump's interest to try and get Venezuela pumping back to some level of what it used to do in the past? Jose?
Oh, that was for me. I'm sorry. Oh,
Yeah, sorry, yes.
Yeah, don't worry. Yeah, absolutely. Considering how the Venezuelan production recovered slightly after the current still ongoing Biden administration lifted sanctions on Venezuela and gave a waiver to Chevron to keep on resume operations of production, and how it contributed mostly to the slight recovery of production of Venezuela in almost a year. So I think that should be a priority for the next Donald Trump administration, even though considering his ongoing and persistent drill baby drill policy or agenda. Okay, but that definitely I think that'll be kind of a consideration on his next government to add
Thanks.
more barrels from Venezuela, even though that myself I consider that uh, uh, PDVSA, for example, will be hardly able to contribute with an additional 200 or 300,000 barrels per day this year.
Thanks. Max, if I can turn to you, what do you see as the big risks for Latin America with the Trump administration in terms of energy?
Thank you, Paul, for the question. My concern right now with Latin America is the great Chinese influence and how Chinese have been slowly gaining ground, in especially mining projects, also in oil and gas, but in many other projects and investments. Right now, China is a larger trading partner than the US in Latin America. And to me, that is a great concern. And I think the Trump administration should, and I think it will, consider the fact that they need to, apply a policy that will somehow deter the Chinese advance in Latin America. Countries like Ecuador, well, of course, Venezuela, somehow Argentina, all over Latin America, we see this gaining advance or gaining ground, with the Chinese over investment projects, large investment projects like oil and gas, mining, hydroelectric power, and many other infrastructure, projects. So to me, that is the great fact that should be taken into consideration, defining policies for the U.S. in the future. Just, along with what Jose was mentioning, I think, and you were commenting, I think Venezuela should be the partner of choice, when talking about, hydrocarbons. Basically, Venezuela has the right type of crude. I think they have with Chevron, as Jose was mentioning, is right now, working in the country, drilling wells. So they have a waiver, to operate in the country. And when they lift the sanction for 6 months, there were influx of many companies. I was part of that project. Unfortunately, I had to leave, the country because of the new sanctions. But you can see that the minute that the sanctions were eased in Venezuela, you have a number of companies ready and rapidly investing and preparing to produce. And as Jose was mentioning, in a few months you saw a production increase from the private sector, not from PDVSA itself, from the private sector, Chevron and other companies, Modern and Prom and others. So I think, to me, Venezuela and also Mexico, of course, should be the partners of choice for the U.S. in the future. And, hopefully we're going to see some actions, in the front to stop the Chinese advance and influence in Latin America.
And to follow up with you, Max, on that question as well, is what will Trump do? I mean, in the backdrop, we've seen this sort of, talk about trade war, particularly with China, the threat of tariffs as well. Is it a stick and carrot? Do you see that, the way that maybe Trump geopolitically operates with many of the Latin American countries will, try and create a better environment for investment? Because when we've seen, particularly in deep water drilling, there's been a lot of a lot of activity going on in Brazil and even in places like Uruguay and some of the small Peru and elsewhere.
Guyana, Suriname.
Yeah, and obviously some of the big ones. Yeah. There's a lot of opportunity there for investment and exploration.
No, definitely. I mean, basically, we saw a lot of action in Guyana, Suriname, and Brazil as is continuing. Drilling. Mexico has great potential in deep water. EMP. So definitely there are investment opportunities for the majors. These are large investment projects. These are long-term projects, 20, 30-year projects. So obviously these are, material for oil and gas majors. So definitely I think Latin America is offering a great, opportunity to produce more hydrocarbons. But again, I think going back to the same point, I think Venezuela has the resources already in the ground. I think it's just a matter of, opening the wells, and putting some infrastructure in place, and you're gonna have again, 2 or 3 million barrels easily accessible, in the market, with, less investments than deep water. Deep water these are very large projects, billions and billions of dollars. So again, I think attention should be placed in countries like Mexico, Brazil, Venezuela. Those are the key partners, for the future when talking about our energy trade, with the U.S. And as far as the sanctions, I think politics and the sanctions, I think, is going to be just a tool that he's going to use to handle his own crowd in the U.S. I don't think that's going to be part of like an economic, policy overall. I think it's going to be just, carrot and stick, as you said, to be used in the future, tariffs, and then it's going to take off the tariffs, as he see, things progress in the future. But yeah.
Thanks, Max. Yes, it's a good point. Aldo, if I could bring you in, and obviously, Mexico's been mentioned a few times now, especially by Max, and obviously there's the situation with potential tariffs on Mexico that Trump has threatened. How do you see that, and what are your risks? What do you see as the big risks, and are some of these threats, credible, or are they just a sort of saber rattling to extract certain benefits from Trump?
I would like to start first by pointing out that perhaps the most vulnerable country, energy-wise, with respect to its relationship with the U.S. is Mexico, given that Mexico gets from the U.S. about 70% of the natural gas it consumes, about 60% of its fuels. So any policy from the U.S. that attempts to reduce the flow of natural gas to Mexico, less so than of fuels because the fuels market is global, would be quite harmful for the Mexican economy. Is this something that has been discussed? It's not that I'm aware of. Is this with tariffs or some form of export controls play a role in the broader discussions that we can expect to be happening surrounding security, migration, organized crime, and the like? It is yet unclear. So is this saber rattling? Probably it is right now. But we need to learn more about what this impact might be. Now, let me add something with respect to what Max just said. The Chinese part of this equation is relevant, maybe not as huge in Mexico as it is in the rest of the region. But one way to read what's going on with the announcement about taking back the Panama Canal is possibly a way to compensate or to take back control from the influence that China has been exerting in infrastructure. The new port in Peru is a prime example of a significant advance that China has been making in the region. So yes, one can see that the thrust of policies will be one of taking back some control from extra-regional partners and increasing U.S. influence in the region.
That's interesting. And if I can ask as well, how do you see Mexico's own Pemex and how the state or energy company is operating now, and what sort of relationship will it have with we've seen sort of and when I say that is, what opportunities are there really for Mexico to raise oil production, oil supply? How do you see its own internal dynamics in terms of being able to sort of produce extra or create extra supply? Where do you see the sort of Mexico production profile here?
Yeah. Well, Mexico, to speak about Mexico is mainly to talk about Pemex, given that it has been for decades the sole producer of oil and gas. Mexico did open up for a brief period between 2016 and 19 to private investment, but it's mostly a Pemex equation. And Pemex is not going through the best of times. Pemex has been losing every year production about 100,000 barrels per day of production since 2004. So it is now producing 2 million barrels less than 20 years ago. It's producing about 1.4 million barrels of crude oil. If you had condensates, that would be about 1.7. But Pemex has a huge debt. Its financial debt is of around $100 billion. Its debt to its contractors, to its providers, its suppliers is around $20 billion. And there's nothing in the horizon right now in terms of announcements, strategy that suggests that there will be a quick turnaround. This is not to say that Pemex or Mexico don't have huge potential. There are many areas where there are untapped reserves and potential reserves that can be developed. Certainly south of or near the US-Mexico border, south of Eagle Ford. The Eagle Ford formation extends into Mexico. And this type of unconventional oil and gas projects would be potentially very successful on the Mexican side. But the political environment is not there, which means that it doesn't seem that the most promising areas for increasing production in Mexico are going to be tapped soon. And without more involvement of private capital, it's going to be very difficult to raise this production. Again, this is because of the financial constraints Pemex is facing. So potential is huge, but politics is not there. And if I may just add one more note, sorry to overextend myself, this is more or less the story for Latin America. This is one region, the one region in the planet that has an energy surplus. And the region in the planet that has the cleanest energy mix. But politics gets in the way of increasing the integration in the region, increasing energy production. In some cases, this has been overcome. Let's think of Brazil. Let's think of what Argentina is now doing. But it gets in the way also with respect to relations with the US. The US pretty much for many years could have solved some of its energy challenges by just relying on Venezuela and Mexico. But there's always some political agenda that gets in the way, either with respect to internal politics or to regional politics.
Yeah, it's a great point. It seems like the US have been having a missed opportunity for such a long time as I care to remember. We've got the survey question in. What will be the most significant impact of US tariffs and sanctions on Latin American energy trade in 2025? So if you can have a look through those watching and our panelists and click your answer. Have a read through. And while we're having a look and having a look through that, I'll turn to you, Jose. I want you to pick up on some of the points been mentioned by Max and Aldo, which is the China obviously being a big risk and big threat, and maybe not just a risk and a threat, but also a pivot for some of Latin America, given that the mishandling by, you would argue, maybe by some US administrations. So how do you see the China factor in Venezuela? Is it a force of change? Is it a force of, is it problematic? How do you see it evolving with Maduro and the Trump dynamic in all this?
Yeah, well, there's one thing that it's undeniable, and that is that the Chinese influence in Venezuela, or the level or the intensity of the Chinese and Venezuela relationship, has changed a lot, or has kind of downgraded during the Maduro government, because it was different during the former Chavez government. I mean, when Chavez was alive in his government, he got massive loans from the Chinese government, okay, in exchange for oil shipments, paid by oil shipments. But that has changed. That has changed significantly. And now the Chinese government has changed its attitude towards the Maduro government. I mean, there's an ongoing relationship, of course, with the Chinese government. There are still commercial exchanges, but the level of support, or the financial backing by Beijing towards Maduro is not the same. The same is happening with Moscow, for example, or with Iran. I mean, these allies that they had significantly closer relationship with the former Chavez government have changed their attitudes towards the Maduro government. And if we can say that the only partner that has been kind of having closer relationship in the oil sector has been Iran, even more than China and Russia. Iran has been sending gasoline shipments during the pandemic, for example, or has been helping Caracas, the Maduro government, in revamping the different Venezuelan refineries. Okay, but that's not the same with Russia, for example. Russia has been keeping Maduro as a geopolitical pivot in terms of military support or security support, but that's it. I mean, the level of oil deals between PDVSA and Russian oil companies is not the same, So that's for me how the landscape of these critical players in Venezuela is unfolding right now, considering how the next Trump administration will negotiate that.
Yeah. Can we bring the results of the survey, please? It's interesting. It's our audience and panelists have suggested a strengthening of they've seen, look at the positive of all this, which is a strengthening of Latin America energy partnerships with global players like China and India, reducing reliance on the US. If I can get Max, maybe bring you back in here to comment on this and some of the thoughts of that survey. I mean, our panelists and our audience have suggested this could potentially be a strength, shifting away from Latin America, from the US, and moving towards China and India. It's not just necessarily a threat. What's your take on that?
Well, I think this is what we've been discussing all along. I think basically we are seeing, a stronger influence on Chinese business, in Latin America. I think the case on Venezuela is different. I think there was a larger commitment with Mr. Chavez, and that faded away with Mr. Maduro. But I think they are exerting a big influence in countries like Peru, Ecuador, even Argentina and Brazil. So basically, I think we are seeing this advance, of Chinese businesses in Latin America. Not necessarily on a political way, because that I think there's a distinction between Venezuela and the rest of the dynamics in Latin America. This is not through politics. This is through money and through business. They are, genuine investments in ports like Aldo was mentioning, in Peru or other businesses. They're genuine, investments. In Ecuador, they were, right now there was a large bid in the field called Sacha, which is one of the largest oil fields in Ecuador, and they just bid a bonus of $1.5 billion, for the field. So, we can say that these are, valid investments. These are not political moves, but on the backdrop of all this, I think there is a political battle between US and China, and that's the new Cold War that we have today, and unfortunately, Latin America apparently is going to be one of the battlegrounds, as Africa or some parts of Asia as well. So that's my take on what the audience is reading here. That if the US, they don't change it, I mean, this things about tariffs, that's going to be if everything is as how we are, explaining here, the tariffs is going to be a negative factor in this battleground, which is Latin America. I think that's my take of what the audience is seeing on the survey.
Yeah. Aldo, if I could bring you in, and we've been quite bleak on the outlook for Latin America, unfortunately. It does seem to be a tale of woe for many years. But there are some bright spots, Brazil potentially, a few of the smaller players as well, maybe Colombia. Are there some bright spots here? Where are the positives you would take out of potentially for 2025 for Latin American and energy policy?
Well, let me take it from the angle of US-Latin America relations. And what has been a traditional, approach from the oil industry, which prefers openness, right? So if we think about the drill, baby drill policy that apparently is coming forward, if we check what the statements from oil and gas companies in the US have been in terms of not interfering with international trade, then there should be a positive environment for investment in oil and gas in the region. If the US doesn't invest more in renewables, at least that seems to be the battle that is coming in terms of policy there. Latin America will continue anyway to do so. It's part of the equation. So that's a bright spot. There's some, to summarize what I'm saying, that there's in a way some form of in-house restraint in the US that is being led by the oil industry itself. If the US were to stop or to disrupt natural gas flows into Mexico from Texas, that would hurt many oil and gas producers in Texas, and so it wouldn't be good business. And there you would have people saying, let's not go through that on that track, right? So there's many implications there, which make me think that the probability of seeing a scenario like that is quite low. But yes, the outlook for a region that does not decide what's going to be its framework for energy investment is overall guarded, right? To insist on what I said, potential is great, but politics have been getting in the way over the decades, not allowing the region to make the best of its potential.
Yeah, fair play. And last word from you, Jose, if I may. Are there any bright spots for Venezuela in all this as well? I mean, it's been pretty downbeat from either the Maduro side or the same side. And even if things were to miraculously change overnight, you're suggesting that it will take some time for Venezuelan production to sort of ramp up. So are there any positives you'd take for Venezuela or for the region generally?
Yeah, for Venezuela, even if we have another 6 years term for Maduro, I mean, I think the government should kind of continue with its kind of pragmatic position towards international investors, like it was doing with the US, for example, or other private investors. In the last year, and according to my understanding and some contacts and friends, I mean, the Venezuelan government has been trying to attract investments even from Gulf countries like Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates or Qatar, and in key sectors like mining, for example, or even the oil and gas sector. Recently, the Venezuelan government renamed the Ministry of Oil to the Ministry of Hydrocarbons, considering the approach that the Venezuelan government has been right now kind of stressing in kind of exploiting the potential of natural gas for a long time, kind of underdeveloped or not really taken into consideration as much as oil. Okay, so I think that with the new Maduro government, which for me it's likely to happen. I mean, and if it wants to attract and continue to improve and recover its oil production, first thing to do is to have a kind of strategic coexistence with the Trump administration.
Good final good word. I just want to say thank you very much, everyone, for your excellent insights. Just want a big thank you to Dr. Aldo Flores-Quiroga, Senior Advisor at FTI Consulting, as a part of his title as well. Max Torres, Exploration VP at PetroTal, and Jose Chalhoub at Parejo Associates in Caracas. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye.